of the stereotyping which is done by other writers about this historical invention of the colonial apparatus. But at the same time, he makes this Babu very witty and very humane, who is ready to help people as well, unlike the other types of Babus who are very, very bureaucratic and who are only loyal to their colonial masters and so on. So this is one way, that is a reversal of the roles which they assign to the different characters. The second is to highlight those parts of history which are deliberately distorted by the fiction narratives written by the colonizers, for instance. Again, examples I can quote from Midnight's Children, from Sia Poppies, from the great Indian novel, from the story of this queen who was a resistance figure, Begum Begum Mahal. What's her name? Yeah, Begum Mahal or something like that. Ji? No. So anyway, her story is written in another novel by Kaniz Murad. It's a very important, book that you would like to read and get hold of first. In all of these novels, you see that certain colonial incidents and accidents are kind of reversed. They are given an 80-degree reinterpretation, and they are reimagined according to our sensibilities, our colonized sensibilities. For example, in the Sia Poppies, there is a female character, Diti, and she, tells us about the about this cultivation of opium, the Sia Poppies, in Bengal and Bihar. Because this is the main setting of this trilogy which he is, coming up with, Ghosh. This character is in dialogue with her daughter. Her name is Kabutri. And she tells Kabutri that it is for the last straight 7 years that we have not been able to thatch our roof. You, the urban class, may not know that in the rural areas, especially in those times, the rooftops had to be thatched. उनके ऊपर मिट्टी का और भूसे का एक मिक्सर मिला के ऊपर लगाया जाता था, क्योंकि यही ज़रिया था पानी को रोकने का, बारिशों से बचने का. तो वो बारिशें आती रहीं, उनका रूफ जो है वो बहता रहा, उसकी मिट्टी निकल गई, उसके ऊपर जो भूसा लगा हुआ था वो भी निकल गया. तो वो इस बात और इसकी वजह क्या है जी? they don't have this bhusa, they don't have this thatch anymore. And the reason which we come to know through this novel is very interesting. She tells us that it is because now people were not allowed, the farmers were not allowed to cultivate wheat and rice and sugarcane and other, and vegetable even, and all of them were forced by the colonial administrators to cultivate only the opium. Why they needed opium? Because there was another colonial project going on that was in China. This is very interesting, that 2 colonial projects, one that is India was already occupied, and China they were planning to occupy. And many of you who have some knowledge of history might be aware that there were a number of opium wars, यानी चाइना में जो लड़ी गई. और उनको opium wars कहते क्यों हैं? इसलिए because opium was involved, that is the trade of opium was extremely profitable at that time. So the East India Company wanted to have a monopoly over this trade, and therefore they forced the farmers in Bengal and in Bihar to cultivate only opium. And from there they used to transport it to China in order to make them bhangis and junkies and those who were not able to fight against the invading forces, that's why अभी भी हमारी पॉपुलर परसेप्शन में एक स्टीरियोटाइप है कि जो चाइनीज़ हैं वो भंग पीते हैं और वो जो है ओपियम बहुत इस्तेमाल करते हैं और स्लीपी रहते हैं और वगैरह. So that is long past now. But anyway, the point is this, that they were forced to cultivate the opium because it were huge profits and trades were involved. So this is the second strategy which Asma wanted us to talk about, and I mentioned. There are so many other narrative strategies in terms of, for instance, magical realism, in terms of inserting certain local tales, as Dr. Nukhbah has mentioned, the folk tales in a certain intertextual manner in order to highlight what is often whitewashed by the colonial narratives.
Dr. Sheeraz, I have a different question for you. Do you think, in your opinion, has there been a sufficient and even effective writing back to the empire? Because Dr. Nukhbah had begun her point by talking about writing back to the empire, to the colonial narrative. If that is so, what has its collective impact been?
I think, as it has been already discussed, that there is not enough of narratives with us against particularly British colonization. And why is this happening? I mean, why today our conceptualization of the challenge, our resistance literature is different. I can recall a book that was published by Pakistan Academy of Letters, and it is titled as Resistance Literature, and there is no resistance against anything, colonial. So there is all the stories that are included in that, all the poems that are included in that anthology, they all are directed against Zia. Because, at that time, Pakistan Academy of Letters was being, governed, headed by a Bhuttoist. So there is kind of conflict between Ziaism and Bhuttoism. And why is that happening? Because we very quickly move away from one thing to the other thing. We have seen many troubles in this country. So, we were supposed to do this, construct these narratives after partition, of course, because before partition, what was happening? There was a poem that was written by the survivor of one of the survivors of Jallianwala Bagh massacre, and he wrote a poem. It is called Khuni Vaisakhi, and it was published. This happened. The event happened. Massacre happened in 1919, and the poem was published in May 1920. And it was immediately banned. You all know that Angare was banned. There were many books that were banned at that time. So people were not given that space. Place was there. Space was shrinking. They were not allowed to do that. So after partition, probably we had this, the right time to go back to history and think about why we are where we are today. But that was not happening. Why? Because when partition happened, something else also happened, that was migration violence. And because of that violence, people started writing against Hindus, and in India against Muslims. So our narrative shifted because of this. This post-colonialism, it was now directed not towards the colonizers, but towards Hindus and those who were killing us at that time of partition, the while partition and during partition, and even after that. That is one shift. Second shift that has happened is within post-colonialism. This curse of this post-colonialism is something that has done a lot of bad things to us, and that was that the focus shifted from the economic issues to the cultural issues. All we today talk about is culture, and when you talk about culture, definitely then the immediate conflict that you see in cultural terms is with Hinduism, and today in today's context it is Hindutva. So because of that, our post-colonialism, it became all cultural theory and debate. So most of the scholarship is focused only on stereotyping, representation, identity crisis. There is no economic. It has already been mentioned, Shashi Tharoor, and there were also people writing in Urdu like Hussain Ahmad Madni. His Naqsh-e Hayat is a very important book about the crimes of the empire long before Shashi Tharoor's this book, Era of Darkness, came out. So there are, works, but they are isolated works because we have now shifted away from, and then immediately after that, 1971 happens, and we had to change again our narrative. Cold War is happening, so there were conflicts within the country, and then 9/11 happens. You were talking about more recent modern histories. So because there is already a scarcity of narratives, we don't have enough of people to write. We don't have time. So the nation is, and whole of South Asia is surrounded by many difficult times. I mean, all the time, over time, we see one tragedy after the other. So that is why probably because of these shifts, we could not focus on, there is a scholar at UT Austin. His name is Snehal Shingavi, and he says that Pakistani literature today is representing what Pakistan actually is not. Now, he's an Indian American living in America, and he has just visited Pakistan, I think, once, and he can see what we are doing through our narratives. But probably we ourselves cannot do that. I don't know. But because of these shifts, because of this shift in the attention, and that also is informed by what the colonial narrative was. Its power, its force can be realized through our narratives even today. Thank you very much.
One question for Dr. Langah. One of the ways, because that's your area of expertise, that's why I think I need to ask this question. South Asian historical fiction has sort of resisted the colonial narrative via translations. How do you think have translations of historical fiction, both from English into the regional languages and vice versa, countered colonial narratives in our part of the world? Have they somehow been an important, and acknowledged and, played an important role in this process?
Yes, I was thinking about this when Dr. Sheeraz was talking, that just to add to his comment and your question, that in terms of when we say that have we been able to write back enough, there is a problem that, there is no acknowledgement of a lot of literature in Pakistan, So what we regard, what we are discussing now, modern literature, Pakistani literature written in English, but there is no acknowledgement, or at state level there's no support for regional languages, So even if we want to talk about translation, if there is no, let's say, Academy of Translations, studies or translations in Pakistan or something, some body like that, which is going to support these translations, then not many people are going to discuss it, Then people might think I'm like an odd person talking here about translation, because, if there is no awareness and there's not enough body of literature produced in the form of translations, then there could be this discourse and dialogue about, how do translations relate to the colonial history? Thank you.
I will now take some questions from the audience. Could you please make sure that you ask questions and they're not detailed comments? Yeah, so any questions, please?
Topic, challenging the colonial narrative. Like, we have different writings in the language of the colonizers, that is English, and that is pretty much like limited to the elitist circle or the upper class or lower class. So as being a writer, what is your responsibility about educating people in general? What about the lower classes? How would they relate to their positionality with respect to colonization?
Yeah, actually I wanted to talk about this a little bit. When we talk about these alternative forms of historiography and fictionalizing history and historicizing fiction, then we do have to resort or to look to those regions and those languages where this kind of alternative consciousness, alternative education is best happening or can best happen. And that is, for instance, as earlier mentioned, our regional languages, our mother tongues, our national language Urdu, and you see, for instance, if you want to read some alternative history in fiction, then perhaps you should better go to Kuratullah and Haidar's Aag Ka Darya, which is a 5,000 years old history covering the Buddhist era to our, post-partition Pakistan. And if you are interested in knowing even more of history, the writer who has gone even much back in history, that is Mustansar Hussain Tarar, who in Bahau and who in Khaso Khashak Zamane, he has traced a history of 8,000 years. And it's very interesting that we are talking here about only these comparatively modern colonial projects of the British, but this era, this area, this subcontinent, it had been at the crossroads of history long before the advent of Islam and the British and the Mughals and so on. There were Aryans. So the Dravidian culture, the Dravidian languages, the Dravidian races, they were subdued and they were colonized by those. And Tarad has, highlighted that lost history in Bahau, and a lot of alternative sense of history is also found in his novel Khaso Khashak Zamane. As you can see from the title itself, that it is a story of the very fragile times, that is Zamane, which is time, which is past, which is history as well. So you're right that we need to work on this, and writing in the colonizers' language, which is, by the way, not only colonizers' language now, but anyway, still this sense is very prevalent that it's a colonizers' language, but I believe that alternative narratives are still are found in our own cultural local languages.
I think Dr. Sheeraz would like to add something.
Yeah, I wanted to add to the same point. I mean, if you have to educate the lower classes, you have used this phrase, the ordinary people who don't have access to English, translation would definitely be one way of doing that. People, because when we talk about colonial narratives, this whole debate stays within the middle classes or globalized, educated middle classes, and it never reaches the lower middle classes or the lower classes. But we, the inheritors of the golden Islamic past, probably we have stopped respecting our past, because in Islamic past there used to be a Darul Hikmah and house of translation, house of wisdom, but in Pakistan, as Dr. Nukhbah was already saying this, HEC doesn't give any credit to any translation work. We have some translation institutions, they are barely given salaries for their these employees. So there is literally no work happening in today's Pakistan on translation. There are individual translators who do translation on their own, but I mean, HEC has in fact banished translation. So how would a colonial piece of work, commission report or a gazette or some writing, like Minute on Indian Education by Macaulay, very notorious one. So how would that reach to the ordinary people if translation is not happening? I mean, there was the time, I emphasize this because we in fact try to always connect ourselves with Islamic history. So they had translated within a few years. During Mamun's time, they had translated hundreds of thousands of books. More than 400,000 books were translated, and they were not just the books coming from Greece or the other developed places. They were also coming from China and the other regions, and they were doing it. And in Pakistan today, we have banished it. Translation, translator is the bechara, ordinary person who is lesser than the creative writer, no credit is given. I'm glad that now Man Booker Prize and other prizes, they have started acknowledging the translator as well, that 50% of the award money is given to the translators. Maybe this would encourage this, and we would definitely be able to educate our those people who don't have access to the master's language. Thank you.
Yes, just a quick response to the lady who just asked the question that I think you addressed us as writers, but we are far more complicated than that because we are academics. So we can, if we become creative writers, that's our choice. But as academics, I think we can address this issue by theoretically approaching these problems. And one thing we need to write about it. Whether we want to write in Urdu, want to write in English, we need to publish, we need the world to know that these are the problems that we face as Pakistanis, these are the issues that are emerging, but not really, the world doesn't know about it. And the other thing that we discussed yesterday as a panel, we got together and we had a bit of a discussion, but that, there is a real dire need of digitizing a lot of literature in Pakistan. There is no digital archiving. If you go to, you'll be surprised that when I go to British Library, when I go to Library of Congress, when I go to BNF Library in Paris, I will find every rare document that belongs to Pakistan in that library, but I won't be able to, and there have been occasions, because I worked on marginal writers, there have been occasions when I approached the writer and said that, I'm looking for this book to translate or to publish a paper to use as a secondary source. The writer has said,